Now, the Trump administration is warning international travelers to get home right now or prepare to stay abroad indefinitely. Photojournalist Ben Garvin talked with St. Paul architect Andrew Jaycott, who's stuck in Guatemala, and he is trying to do just that.
I do love to travel. I've traveled to Vietnam, Cambodia, Jordan, Colombia, 24 days through Mexico. I love seeing different parts of the world. I think it makes us better human beings to understand the world and the people around us. I did have some hesitancy even coming. There were no cases in Guatemala. At the time that I left on the 9th, things were relatively isolated. Even within the United States, they restricted entrance into Guatemala. And at first I was like, okay, I'm okay, I just need to leave. Then American Airlines canceled my flight. So that's when I kind of started to get nervous. I rebooked through Delta. After Delta canceled my flight, I decided I needed to leave immediately and hopped online, bought a $1,000 one-way plane ticket out of Guatemala City, and hired a private driver to drive from San Pedro to Guatemala City that night. And was at the airport at 4 a.m. The staff was, kind of just peeking open behind from one door and stating that nobody was flying. They weren't allowing anyone into the airport. So that's when I really knew I was stuck. And honestly, things escalated extremely quickly here in a matter of 3 days. Things have gone from, business as usual to restaurants are currently takeout only. The borders have all completely closed for 2 weeks, but there's nothing to say that they won't extend them. And that, to me, is the scary part. I've contacted our embassy, and I believe that they are working on something. I haven't received a lot of information from them. I was really scared initially. My spirits are better today. Appears that, being outside is still okay. I've done a few runs through, Antigua, which is a beautiful colonial city. It's one of those just beautiful cities where the light kind of cascades across all these old plaster walls. Another thing that I did while I was here is I actually did a volcano trek. That was another pretty cool experience and a way to be physically active here in Guatemala.
Andrew says he did join a Facebook group for stranded Americans, and he bought a 4th new plane ticket just last night. So good luck getting home, Andrew. We're thinking about you. Now to something we've been